Good to see everyone and good to share Song of the Morning Ranch with all of you. I get to sit here in the middle of the lodge, so if you close your eyes, you could be here too. The topic I was given to talk about today is yoga philosophy in the tradition of our master, Paramahansa Yogananda. And of course, that's quite a topic. But when I thought about it for a bit, I thought that yoga itself is really not so much a philosophy as it is an experience. Yoga, the word itself means union with God. So that's what we're going to talk about, the experience of union with God. When Paramahansa Yogananda came to the United States in 1920, exactly 100 years ago, he was coming to the West where he knew there were a lot of religions and synagogues and churches and prayer halls and people doing a lot of charitable works. But he also knew that the people of the West lacked, by and large, the experience, the direct experience of God. So that's what he came to bring to the West. And what attracts us to this philosophy is that experience. As we, through the years, practice the techniques we've been given, that Master brought to us, drawn and kept to those techniques and to those practices through the magnetism of his love that's so apparent through the writings, the copious writings that he left for us. So when you pick up the book Autobiography of a Yogi, something inexplicable happens to you. You start going with Master on a quest that you didn't know you were already going on yourself. The quest to find out the hidden truth behind the external realities in your life. And something kept on drawing you on as you read the book. And you weren't sure exactly what, but you kept digging deeper. You might go to a service or start the lessons, the SRF lessons, or take a yoga class or something along that line. And then somewhere in this activity of yours, things start to happen. You might see a light. You might hear a deep ringing of bells within yourself. You might have unusual circumstances around you that you really can't explain. You might have dreams that you know they mean something. And these things start going on and on until you decide to make a very big step in your life. You decide to become Master's disciple. So what happens then? Well, I'm going to read to you a quote from a holy man. His name is Fakir Nasir. And this is what he says happens when you have a master. A master is the real and unselfish guide and administrator of the seeker. He arranges circumstances for your growth, for the development of the seeds he throws in the soil of your mind and heart. Your weaknesses are made to expose themselves to your view and then drop off. And this is done not by word of mouth, but by the circumstances arranged for that purpose. Again, let me repeat. Your weaknesses are made to expose themselves to your view and then drop off. And this is done not by word of mouth, but by the circumstances arranged for that purpose. Your life is different now. You've taken a giant step towards God. Here's what Master said in the beginning of Autobiography of a Yogi to set the stage for the book. He says that the culture in India is a search for ultimate verities and the concomitant guru-disciple relationship. So yoga is that search for ultimate verities, which means for God. And the path to that experience leads through the guru-disciple relationship. We're told that when the student is ready, the teacher appears by him. And those of us who have already launched ourselves on this experience know what I will be talking about as I continue the talk today. I want to begin telling you a bit about the life of a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, one that became a disciple of Master and took him for his guru, and how it changed his life. Mr. J. Oliver Black, whom you all know as a founder of our organization, the founder of Gold Lotus Incorporated. He was a successful businessman, and he worked in the high-powered Detroit auto industry as an executive. But he was also a religious man, and he was always searching for answers, searching for the truth. He would tell us, from preacher to preacher. He would ask questions, trying to find out the meaning of certain passages in the Bible that were a mystery to him. And he told us that he had 3 questions that he would ask, and no one could tell him the answer. And the questions were this, passages from the Bible. The first one was, the kingdom of heaven lies within. Well, what does that mean? A kingdom lies within. And the second question was, be still and know that I am God. How can being still bring one to a knowledge of God? And then his third question was, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be filled with light. Was that symbolic? Is there really light? What is the single eye? So these were the questions on his mind, and they were not answered until he met his master, Paramahansa Yogananda. Master brought him to the understanding and the experience of these 3 questions. First of all, the inner worlds that are revealed to the deeply meditating yogi, the astral worlds and the higher worlds, so that you know that what we see on the physical plane is not all that there is. And this stillness that takes you beyond your body motions and your endless desires and your constantly roving thoughts to that experience and place that Master named self-realization, which is the realization of God. And then the third experience, which Master opened for him, his spiritual eye, which lies in the center of your forehead, and gave him the experience of inner light. Thy whole body shall be filled with light. Now, Master emphasized meditation with his disciple, Yogacharya Oliver. He knew that Yogacharya was running a large corporation and had a family. And he also asked him to develop and run the huge operation known as the Detroit Self-Realization Fellowship Center at the Detroit Institute of Arts. That was a lot of activity and a lot of responsibility, but still he would keep after him to meditate. And as he meditated, his knowledge of reality grew. And knowledge of reality is knowledge of God. Yogacharya told me one time that when you get to the real levels of real spiritual development, that the very first thing you develop is the ability to heal. Now, many healings happened around Yogacharya, and there were quite a number of them during his time of doing services down at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Some of you may have heard this particular story. One of the women that attended his service on a regular basis, And most of us did. There was a power to those services. So we'd go every Sunday and spend Sunday with him. But this woman got into a very serious accident. And as Yogacharya would tell us, every bone in her body was broken. And she ended up in the hospital with her arms and her legs suspended, as they do, trying to knit the bones. And she knew come Sunday that a healing prayer would be offered by Yogacharya for her. He did that every Sunday at a certain part of the service. So she knew just about exactly what time that was going to be happening. So as she laid there in traction, she concentrated her mind on the service that was happening at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And the story she told was that something opened up and she could actually see Yogacharya sitting on that stage in front of everyone in the auditorium and conducting the healing prayer for her. And as he did, she said she could hear click, click, click. The different bones of her body started to knit. So when this was through, she called in her nurse and she told her, she said, look, I've got to get out of here, I'm fine. Needless to say, the nurse would not believe her. And finally, she made such a fuss that they did agree to re-x-ray the bones, and sure enough, she had been healed. This is just one example of the many happenings that happened around Yogacharya services at the Detroit Institute of Arts. As one continues to develop spiritually, as he gets closer to God, he goes beyond the limitations of his physical body. Once when I was new on staff here at Song of the Morning Ranch, and I and one other staff member, we would travel with Yogacharya to Detroit to take care of his needs in Detroit while he was attending to the service at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And my room was on the 3rd floor of his house in the maid's quarters. And because I had a telephone in my room, I was the one that had to answer the telephone at night whenever it rang. So one night, and I was brand new and actually pretty new to yoga, so I really didn't know what to expect living in his very house as I did. The phone rang at night and a woman on the other end of the phone was very distraught and excited, and she said she needed to have Yogacharya Oliver. Well, normally I would not pass on a telephone call at that time of night, but because she was so upset, I went down the stairs, opened the door in the hall, crossed the hall, and knocked on Yogacharya's bedroom. And I said, Yogacharya, there's a woman on the phone who's quite upset, and she needs your help. And he said, okay. And I heard him pick up the phone and say, hello. So when I did that, I backed off to the stairway and was just about to shut the door and go back upstairs when I heard him say to her, I'll be right there. Well, I thought, I better stay here because he's going to want me to go and get his car and take her, him to her so that he can help her. So I stood there waiting, didn't hear anything, and I kept on waiting. And finally it occurred to me what was happening. He was planning on going and helping her, but he wasn't taking his body with him. Yogacharya told us that he did do most of his work on the astral plane. He didn't need to take his physical body in order to help you. Okay. So many things happened around Yogacharya. He knew what was on our minds better than we did ourselves. And we fed off his deep spirituality and intense joy. Then one night on the 16th of September, 1989, he left us. I was in the hospital room at Siegel Memorial Hospital here in Gaylord within an hour of his passing. And as I came into the room with Peggy Braden, who had been with him at the time that he left his body, and I looked at him lying on the bed, and I realized that, you know, you have these deja vu situations that I had seen this exact scene years ago in a dream. Every detail, the bed, the way he looked, even myself being there to see it. So when I went up to him and I started talking to him in my mind, not out loud, but I said, Yogacharya, I know you're trying to tell me something. I saw this all those years ago. What are you trying to tell me? He answered me immediately. He couldn't have answered me more quickly if he had spoken with his physical lips. He said two things. One answer was that everything happened just exactly the way it was supposed to. In other words, I shouldn't think that, well, did the nurses take care of him? Was he given enough vitamins, whatever? This was laid out, every detail to happen years before, and it had now come to pass. His second answer was even more interesting. He said, now is the time for the fulfillment of dreams. And he said plural. He didn't just mean my dream of years ago. He meant all the things he had told about that would happen in the future for here, Song of the Morning Ranch. And now here we are all these years later, still fulfilling these dreams. Now is the time for the fulfillment of dreams. So Yogacharya showed us through his life how following Master's teachings and meditating regularly can transform you. So now, maybe coming down to the level, maybe a little bit more of our own and as spiritual devotees. It's pretty obvious that the world we live in can sometimes turn into a booby trap. Everything is going along fine, and then all of a sudden someone dies or COVID-19 comes or a flood or whatever. And we go from joyful to scared and depressed or angry. Maybe we land in the hospital. So how does Master's teachings help us then? Well, Yogacharya used to tell us, he said, live God. He said, if you are thinking of God, nothing bad can happen to you. Well, I used to think of that, and it was a little difficult for me to understand. How could just thinking of God keep you from having these negative experiences? And so I used to think of it. And then again, with time, things would happen. And one I felt was a particularly pointed experience of how that happens. Because as a person meditates through the years, they do get into a state where when you're in a situation, your mind is going to automatically turn to God. So this is what happened to me. I was working in the post office in Gaylord, and I worked the night shift. And I was coming home one night after 11:30, that's when I got off. And I was heading east on, for those of you who know Gaylord, on M32 going outside of town. Traffic speeds up there to 55 miles an hour, and the roads were sheer ice. So when I got to the corner where I was supposed to stop and stepped on the brake, my car went wildly out of control. First thing out of my mouth was, God help me. And from that point on, I had nothing to do with what happened, because the car took a U-turn in front of the opposite lane of traffic where a semi was barreling down the road. It started teetering along the bank on the other side of the road in the same direction as the semi, didn't slip over the bank, stayed on the edge. Then, much to my shock, took another U-turn again in front of that semi, which now was so close that I could see the horror in the eyes of the driver. He was sure he was going to hit me. Well, he didn't. I slipped by him. I was not controlling anything. And my car, now back in the lane, my right lane where I'm supposed to be to begin with, came to a slow and gentle stop right at the corner where I was supposed to turn. Well, as if that wasn't enough demonstration of how going to God is a protection for you. The next day in the local papers, there was a story about a woman who, driving on those same icy roads on I-32, same highway, was hit by a semi and killed. So that was a pretty strong lesson. Master loved a poem written by, I don't know the name of the writer, but the name of the poem was The Hound of Heaven. And it has a beautiful line in it that says, "Not shelters thee who will not shelter me." So the converse of that is that if you shelter God, he will shelter you. So when one hears about faith, but what is faith? Faith is a knowing, and it develops the closer we come to God. Dayamata, a longtime president of Self-Realization Fellowship who died in 2010, these are her words. She said, "Trust more in God, believe more in God, accept God, believe in him who can right every wrong that has ever been done to you." And Master Paramahansa Yogananda said, "Always remember that nothing can ever touch you if you are inwardly in love with God." And he also said about God, "For a while, he will play hide and seek with you. But if you are persistent, you will begin to see wonderful things happening mysteriously that you know come from God. In time, you will receive his clear response in the form of direct answers to your prayers or in visions of the saints. Then at last he will come to you openly. You will be able to talk to him. You will be able to commune with him." Now, we said in the beginning that the master or guru arranges the circumstances of our life so that our weaknesses are made to expose themselves to us and then be removed, okay? Now, we've also heard the old saying that faith can move mountains. That takes a lot of faith to move a mountain. Yogacharya loved to tell the story of how he'd think of how the great prophet Muhammad, the great Islam prophet Muhammad, said to a mountain, "Mountain, come here," and it started rumbling. So great was the prophet's faith. So Yogacharya decided that he would try that himself just to see how this works. Now, in his house on Parkside Avenue in Detroit, he had a living room, and then he had a large formal stairway, and then a landing on which there was an old-fashioned boiler heater. And then the stairway continued up after the landing. And one day he was sitting thinking of the Prophet Muhammad, and he looked at the boiler, and he said to the boiler, "Come here." And the pipe started bubbling, and the thing started shaking. And then he backed off and he said, "Whoa," and stopped it. So that's a demonstration of faith, all right. Our faith may not be quite as developed as that. Let's say, for instance, that our circumstances keep on pounding at us. And each time they do, we give up and say, it's all over. I just can't handle this. And we pray desperately and so on. And then all of a sudden, everything turns out all right. And then we sit back and rather sheepishly and say to ourselves, well, where was my faith? But the next time I will know that, and I will, of course, like they say, even-mindedness is yoga, I'll be fine. So then comes another circumstance. And once again, we're rattled and we go off our tilt or do whatever. And the same thing happens. And this goes on, but each time we are increasing our faith. So as our faith grow stronger. Things do begin to happen. And this is what Master Paramahansa Yogananda says about that. He says, disbelief and doubt, delusions, first line of attack are summarily routed by undoubted faith. So disbelief and doubt, which are delusions, first line of attack, are summarily routed by undaunted faith. He also said that everyone is given ample opportunities without willfully creating them to demonstrate courage and prove the power of faith. And then he says, when your mind and will are attuned to the divine will, you do not have to move a finger in order to create changes on earth. The divine law will work for you. Just think how wonderful that will be when we all grow to that level of faith. Master continues saying, whatever you intensely believe in your mind will materialize. He will respond invisibly to your desires, playing hide and seek with you. And after that, he will come to you openly. So faith is just one example of the qualities that are developed by the sincere yogi on his way to full self-realization, or to yoga, which is union with God. Now, Yogacharya would tell us that the last thing to go before self-realization is your ego. Now, the ego, sometimes when we think of the ego, we think of, pride or arrogance or some of these traits. But in actual fact, the ego is a little more complicated than that, a little actually more difficult than that, because the ego is actually our identification with this physical body, which allows us to interact with the physical plane. That's pretty basic, isn't it? And it's also our personality, our thoughts, all these things with which that we identify with ourselves. And the idea of giving that up, and the reason it's so difficult is the question becomes, what's left? What if I give up what I feel and know to be me? That actually is the basis of the fear of death. What we don't see the person, are they still there? Are they still? But it's good to think of that issue in a different way. Rather than thinking of yourself, think of what it would be like if you could identify with everything about you as your own self. Think of it that way. What if those leaves on the tree were trembling in your own heart, and you could feel the sap running up and down in joy as the spring comes, and going back down in the fall? And what if when that bird leaps on your windowsill and grabs a seed and goes into flight, you can flutter in the air with him? And what if you could feel and know what is going on in the hearts of the other people around you, whether they're people that you agree with or don't agree with, but you feel it as a part of your own self, your own understanding? What if you could do that? Then Master was so identified with what was around him that he said sometimes it was hard for him to remember which body he was supposed to move. He also said that, interestingly enough, that when you are identified with someone, even on the superconscious level, on your way towards deeper relationship with God, you have your normal conscious level, the subconscious, then you have the superconscious, you have the Christ conscious, and the cosmic conscious. But even down on the superconscious level, he said that if a person was standing in front of you, and you were on that level, you would be able to know everything in his mind. You would know everything that had happened in his life and that was going to happen and that had happened in his past lives and in the future. It gives you a feel of what is ahead of us as we develop and get to the point at the end of the line where we're finally ready to give up our smaller existence and expand completely into God. Well, in yoga, we really don't have to worry too much about the ego because the techniques are designed to help us override it. Take, for example, the techniques we practice. Take, for example, the Hong Sa. Where is the ego in that? Or take the Om technique or the Kriya technique. Where is the ego in those? Or where is the ego as you are involved in selfless service or in helping someone with need or in doing something beyond yourself for the good of an organization or for your country or whatever? Where are the ego in those things? Or when you meditate or when you chant? And as you do these things, God gets closer and closer to you. Begin to touch him more and more. And this begins to happen more and more in ways that are unique to each one of us, because each one of us is a unique experiment of God. And what happens to the ego and all of that? You don't really need to work on it. Your ego will fade away when the time comes, just as surely as a blossom fades and what is left is a beautifully ripened fruit. Master told Yogacharya that he had the highest form of teaching. Yogacharya told us that he didn't emphasize the don'ts. Instead, he emphasized what you should do, following Master's teachings, and above all, meditate. Here at the retreat, we meditate together every evening. And whether you live here or not, I invite you to join us at that time, 8 o'clock in the evening. Because if you do, and you keep your mind on God, you will find that little by little, year after year, God will reveal himself to you. And he will make it special, something between just the two of you. And you will find yourself getting happier and joy will overtake you. We are told that the happier you are, the more spiritual you are. So the path we are on has a lot of joy ahead. So I know I haven't used up my time if you have questions, but I will just say in final words that do what Yogacharya says, do what Master said, live God and meditate and know God. And that is the philosophy of yoga. And then the beautiful chant song that Shannon chose as the name of our retreat. Let's think of that one. What lightning flash glimmers in thy face, mother? What lightning flash? Seeing thee, I am filled through and through. Seeing thee, I am filled through and through. The life of my life is you.